Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevon, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevon, and this is Kinda Murdery. You know, it's been an emotional couple of weeks for me, my close friend from college and a great friend of the show, the infamous, notorious, brilliant, kind, irreverent, hilarious, the list goes on really, tech founder Mahbod Moghadam, passed away in March, and I found out he was gone on April 3rd, which also happens to be the birthday of another dear friend, roommate, and profound influence on my life, and on this show, actor Nicholas Tucci, star of the cult hit horror film You're Next, who was also taken from us far too soon 4 years ago at the start of the pandemic. Finding out about Mahbod on Nick's birthday when my mind and heart were already full with the bittersweet pain of remembering Nick sent me into something of an emotional tailspin over the past week. Nick was 39 when he left us in 2020. Mahbod was only 41 when he shuffled off the mortal coil just a few weeks ago. Both were taken by cancer, and both had so much genius still to offer the world. They were far too young. And the time-worn cliche, only the good die young, feels more prescient and true than ever. Cliche is generally viewed as a derogatory term for an overused sentiment, but sometimes I think certain sayings become cliche by no fault of their own, but rather because they are persistent, recurring truths, and the cliches that express them are the simplest and perhaps somewhat counterintuitively the most elegant way of describing something that all of us experience and know to be true. So yes, only the good die young, and Nick and Mahbod were far too young, and despite their often brash public personas, a quality that they both shared, both Nick and Mahbod had truly loyal, generous, good hearts. Two of the best hearts I have ever known, and I will miss them both very much for the rest of my life. But although both friends were dear to me and now will be forever linked in my mind and heart because of the time we shared together in college and also because I learned of Mahbod's passing on Nick's birthday, right now it's Mahbod who is in the forefront of my mind, so I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about him. We both graduated from Yale in 2004. He would go on to Stanford Law School, while I moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. While still at Yale, Mahbod and his friends founded a company that you may have heard of called Rap Genius. It's now just called Genius. But Rap Genius was an annotation website where the community and also artists themselves could annotate, elucidate, explain, and expand upon the meaning embedded in rap lyrics as though they were great works of literature or poetry, which, in many cases, they are. Eminem was actually one of the first investors in and artist contributors to the site, annotating many of his own songs. Now, Rap Genius eventually expanded beyond hip-hop and is now just called Genius. Mahbod was the soul and voice of the Rap Genius community, and it was his larger-than-life personality that gave the site and the brand its swagger. After founding Rap Genius, Mahbod became a major figure in the blockchain and crypto arena, supporting companies like Coinbase, and going on to found additional unicorn tech companies including Everipedia and HelloDoge. Now, HelloDoge is a social media site kind of like a Facebook-Twitter combo where instead of user-generated content making money just for the site, users are paid in Dogecoin for their activity. And back in 2002, in Kinda Murdery's infancy, Mahbod and HelloDoge were kind enough to sponsor my show at a time when Kinda Murdery was too small to draw interest from sponsors or advertisers. Mahbod, or Mabu as I and other friends affectionately called him, was always one to court controversy. He famously feuded with Warren Buffett over Buffett's hostility to Bitcoin and crypto, Sacha Baron Cohen, who tricked and bullied Mahbod into humiliating himself under false pretenses, which, if you ask me, tends to be Baron Cohen's recipe for comedic success. As you might suspect, although I did laugh my ass off at Borat, I'm not a big fan of Cohen. I feel that he tends to trick people, exploit their better impulses, their willingness to give a stranger the benefit of the doubt, and the natural desire to please someone holding a camera, and then, after he's bamboozled the people, he vilifies them and presents himself as a moral crusader, all to basically make money. Yuck. But I digress. In addition to Buffett and Cohen, Mahbod also feuded with Mark Zuckerberg, Ben Horowitz, and others, and he was vilified by some across the internet for a brilliant, hilarious, and satirical, although not everyone thought so, essay he wrote about how to shoplift from Whole Foods. There's a link in the show notes, but the article has been removed because of the ensuing legal uproar. Now, in May of 2014, Mahbod was forced out of his position at Genius, the company he founded and was the heart and soul of. Some of this is my opinion, but hey, it's my show, so he was the heart and soul of it, and if you check out Genius today, the current iteration pales in comparison, both in value offered and fun, when compared to the original Rap Genius site, and it has since Mahbod left. But he was forced out of Genius by his friends and co-founders after he annotated the manifesto of the UC Santa Barbara Isla Vista shooter within days of that horrific event. His annotations included many irreverent and tasteless jokes and observations that were completely inappropriate and even vile, especially in the immediate wake of such a terrible tragedy. But that one act, that one abuse of his freedom of speech, I suppose you could say, did not encapsulate who Mahbod was. In fact, just a few months before the annotation, in November of 2013, Mahbod had surgery to remove a recurring brain tumor. It was the return of this same brain tumor that ultimately killed him just over a month ago. Now, I've known Mahbod since 2003, a decade before the brain tumor first appeared, and I can tell you with absolute certainty and no rose-colored glasses that the brain tumor certainly changed his personality. While he was always bold and irreverent and unafraid to ruffle a few feathers, after the brain tumor it was clear that his ability to self-filter, his impulse control, his ability to regulate the public output of his brilliant mind had changed. He was not as fully in control of himself and his thoughts as he once had been. Hardly his fault. Because of how obvious this was to me, it made me angry when his friends, people who knew him far better than I did, forced him out of his company, following those admittedly terrible annotations. His friends should have known that those annotations grew out of Mahbod's medical challenges, and sought to help him rather than discard him. This is a persistent theme in our cancel culture crazy society that really upsets me. Although I haven't talked about it recently, if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I have cerebral palsy and that I advocate for both people with disabilities and those facing mental health and emotional struggles. I think we can all agree, in a vacuum at least, that someone facing mental health challenges deserves compassion and help, not vilification and attack. Certainly not personal or professional destruction. I'm not a doctor, so I'm not asserting that Mahbod had mental health struggles per se, except, as I said, that it was clear to me as his friend that his brain tumor changed his personality, and made him a little bit more of a loose cannon than he was before. So while at its core it's more of a medical challenge, I think in this case it's fairly safe to say that the brain tumor equates to mental health, and I feel like I see it all too often, especially online, but also in real physical life, that when somebody does something quote-unquote cancelable or expresses something reprehensible, and it seems obvious to me that that person is struggling with mental health issues and should be helped, treated with compassion, understanding, and empathy. Instead, in our collective rush to assert our own moral superiority, the person is just destroyed and branded a monster, depicted as someone with true evil in their hearts, when in fact they're just a human being waging the battle we all know as life and fighting an illness that obscures who they really are. As Mahbod's friend, it was always clear to me that this was the case with him, and that his many online detractors were far more interested in virtue signaling than in understanding, a sin for which they certainly are not alone. In the months before he died, I saw people online talking shit about Mahbod, not trolls, but people who knew him, people who had been his friends. But then, when he died, I saw those same people posting about their fond memories of him, grasping, in my opinion, for their own 15 seconds of cultural relevance. This pisses me off so bad. What in the world could possibly be more obnoxious than narcissistic moral superiority? Of course, we have social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, and those companies are all founded, funded by, have revenue driven by exactly that. People's narcissistic moral superiority. So there you go. That's the gross price of living in the, quote, future, unquote, I guess. But while I do believe that Mahbod's battle with the brain tumor affected how he presented and communicated, who Mahbod was to me never changed. And let me tell you about who he was. He was a good friend. He was passionate. He was cool. But for all his apparent cockiness, he was not self-obsessed or egotistical or judgmental or unkind or any of those things, at least not to his friends. I think we all know that in these times of fractured attention that we live in, it can be hard to communicate regularly even with close friends and family. You text someone, who knows when they'll text you back? You call someone, who knows when they'll call you back? And too many people curate their friendships like they're an expensive watch collection or something, constantly evaluating whether or not someone is worthy of their exotic menagerie of relationships. Mahbod was not like that at all. I thought he was cool, he thought I was cool, we liked each other, we were friends, and that was that. Even at his most notorious and successful, when he was hanging out with rappers, attending Kim and Kanye's wedding, and his various startups were receiving tens of millions of dollars in venture capital funding. If I called Mahbod, he answered or called me back shortly thereafter. If I texted him, he replied. If I asked for his advice on something, he took the time to give it to me, thoughtfully and heartfelt. Mahbod always made time for the people he cared about, and he never big-timed, in quotes, his friends. That is so incredibly rare anywhere and in any walk of life, but in Los Angeles, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, in entertainment, tech, and crypto, it is so rare as to be almost non-existent, mythical, even. Mahbod's beautiful mind, heart, and the importance he put on being available to and being there for his friends made him a true unicorn, just like the companies he founded, and I will miss him very much. Oh, did I mention he was also an accomplished classical pianist? Check out his Instagram reels if you want to hear him crush some Bach. And so today, in honor of Mahbod's amazing life and the amazing person he was, Kinda Murdery is replaying the episode he guested on in 2021. This is an episode from season 1 of the show when it was formatted a bit more like the Howard Stern show, and I always had guests to interview as well as a crew of additional regulars to toss comments from the peanut gallery. So it's a bit of a different format than what you're used to if you're new to the show. But I hope you'll enjoy it. And I hope you appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with Mahbod, just as much as I did every time I had the chance. R.I.P., my friend. So if you're ready, please join me. Kinda Murdery's visit to Olancha, California with Mahbod Moghadam starts now. Hey everybody, and welcome to Kinda Murdery Season 1, Ghost Towns of the Mojave Desert. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg. Thanks for deciding to be here. Today we explore the Mojave ghost town of Olancha, California. Located on the junction of the 190 and the 395 on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada in the Owens Valley is the town of Olancha, California. Founded in 1860 by Minard Farley, who discovered silver in the nearby Costco Range. Olancha got its first post office in 1870, which seems to mark the official beginning of all of our towns. Fast forward to August 1969, when Manson family members Charles Tex Watson and Diane Snake Lake moved to Olancha 2 days after Lake murdered Sharon Tate. Lake was shortly taken into custody in Independence after Olancha residents complained to authorities about her swimming in the nude. But they didn't know yet that she had murdered Tate, so she was released. And a few weeks later, she and Tex moved to the Manson family's final hideout in Death Valley at Barker Ranch. In 1983, the Navy accidentally dropped a dummy missile right near Olancha that sunk into the swamp and disappeared. I think you guys get the idea. Clearly, the approximately 200 residents of Olancha, California, have endured a 170-year history of being kinda murdery, pretty darn murdery, and absolutely, positively, super duper murdery. All right, welcome to Kinda Murdery, everybody. I'm here today with the great Adam Volrich. How you doing today, Adam?
Oh, I'm absolutely fantastic. How are you, Zevon?
So good. I'm also here with Sean Christensen from Criminal Content. Sean, how's it going?
Very well. How about you?
Doing well, doing well. I'm here as well with Bear, Brendan Hubbard. How are you, Bear?
Sticky and saucy.
And of course, I am here with Oracle of the Digital Future, founder of Genius and Everipedia, the Crypto King, the Baron of Bitcoin, the Angel of Ethereum. It's the Evian Don, Mahbod Moghadam. Hey, Mahbod, how you doing, buddy?
Yo, I'm feeling murderous.
All right, well, then you are in the right emotional space, my friend.
Yeah, we're off to a good start.
Awesome. So, Mahbod, I wanted to ask you, what have you been up to these days? What kind of projects you working on? Where's your focus? I mean, you're sort of famous for, I wouldn't call you a unicorn hunter. You're more of a unicorn builder. You got that Midas touch in terms of finding great tech startups and bringing them to the world. So, where's your mind focused right now?
Right now, I'm trying to murder the banks. And I've been into Bitcoin since 2013.
All right. Oh, man. So other than the crypto focus, you got anything else in the hopper? What's keeping you busy right now? Or is it just evangelizing for crypto?
It's all crypto. It's all crypto. You know, the companies that I've been working on for years now, it's all basically just trying to make the crypto ecosystem work. Because what I'm excited about crypto is not just being able to use it as money, but being able to use that as money to pay people on the internet.
You had some interesting interactions with Mark Zuckerberg, and weren't you feuding with Warren Buffett for a while? Is that a real thing, or am I making that up?
Buffett, I still don't like. Just, everyone else is catching up with me now. When I started beef with Buffett, Bitcoin hadn't even been invented yet, and then him just coming out as exactly how you'd expect. It's like if he didn't exist and you were just writing him into a script. He decided to be public enemy number one of Bitcoin. He can't just say, I don't understand this, I'm going to let it slide. He came out, his famous quote is, he said, Bitcoin is rat poison. And I was like, yeah, so that probably means that you're the rat.
Oh, gosh. Well, his entire, reputation is built on analysis of sort of traditional fundamentals of companies. So I can see how something new and cutting edge could be perceived as a threat to that, perhaps. I mean, that might be where he's coming from.
Yeah, he's fake. He's selfish. The reason he hired the Gecko is because the actors all went on strike in the 70s.
Oh, wow.
So when the actors went on strike, he decided, I'm just going to hire a cartoon gecko. So that really tells you all you need to know about that guy.
That makes me want to know who the actor is who does the voice of the cartoon gecko.
Yeah, we need to blacklist him.
You should start an NFT called Buffett.
Yeah, no one else is going to do it. You can sell his famous quotes as NFTs.
All right. Hey, well, are you guys ready to get into the town of Olancha, California?
Let's do it.
Let's launch it.
Taking a quick look at the itinerary here, it's clear that Olancha, California has plenty of attractions for kinda murdery tourists like us. First up, it's the case of the missing body, or a hole with trees all around. Next, we've got American Psycho, Patrick Bateman meets The Great Escape, a story of evil rage and, admittedly, a little genius, and a lot of gross. Gear up for Stephen Leslie Wilson. And finally, A tale that would be tall for anyone else, but it's true for him. Superhuman pilot, survivalist, Peter Deleo. All right, so first up, case of the missing body or a hole with trees all around. To frame this for you guys a little bit, this tale of Evans versus Moore, what it really is the darkest version of Much Ado About Nothing ever. And I'll get into why that is. So here's what happens. On the night of January 16th, 1947, World War II Pacific Theater veteran and ex-boxer Evans shoots and kills Los Angeles Deputy Marshal Frederick Moore. A manhunt ensues, and Evans is arrested 2 days later in Olancha, where he readily confesses to the murder. There's only one problem. The writ of habeas corpus. There's no body. And even Evans doesn't know where it is. So what the heck is going on? I want to start this story by telling you a little bit about the victim. Los Angeles Deputy Marshal Frederick Moore is a man who commands a lot of respect. He's a World War I veteran, and he was a war reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle during the Russo-Japanese War. He wrote several adventure books, and he was the editor of Argosy magazine, which was like a pulp fiction and pulp news magazine. He was editor of Argosy for 8 years. Then in his approaching golden years, he moved from San Francisco and he semi-retired in Los Angeles. Now, you know, even when you're semi-retired, you need to keep busy. It's nice to have a little bit of income. So he becomes a Los Angeles deputy marshal. And on the side, when he's off duty, he works as a custodian at 2 different restaurants owned by a man named Frank Madras and his wife, Eleanor. Now, Eleanor has a brother named Edward H. Evans, and Evans was mentally unstable. He was suffering from shell shock due to what he experienced in the war, and beyond that, he was a retired, described as mediocre boxer, which means that he was both shell-shocked and punch-drunk. So Evans has, not that surprisingly, a checkered past. In addition to the mental strain of wartime and too many punches to the head, he was married to a woman named Alice Adams. They had a son together, but they divorced in 1938. By 1940, he's in the hospital in Honolulu, battling a brain infection and being treated for alcoholism. So this punch-drunk, shell-shocked alcoholic and veteran, and somebody for whom I have some sympathy for a lot of reasons, but not so much for this particular one, which was he was the one who shambled into Mrs. Madras's restaurant that night in 1946 to meet Moore for the first time. So this is the story of that meeting.
This guy sounds like he's Logan Paul's ancestor or something.
Oh my gosh, did you watch that fight?
Yeah, kind of. I watched it on Twitter.
Fight in quotes. Yeah, my gosh, what a show. So he is the brother of the woman who owns the restaurant, and he comes in and he sees Frederick Moore working as the custodian in the restaurant, and he just kind of immediately accosts him and starts talking a lot of shit to him. You know, he's a little bit not all there, but he's being very hostile, and Moore just kind of tries to brush it off, but he can't. And he even tells him, look, man, I'm a deputy marshal, and Evans can't really wrap his mind around the idea that the janitor at his sister's restaurant is also an officer of the law, and so he keeps giving him a hard time, and finally Moore becomes concerned that Evans might become violent, and so he shows him his police sidearm. At this point, and the paper says that, Evans understood the language of violence better than anything else, Evans backs down, but this spark of hatred towards Moore is lit in his mind. And perhaps that spark would have guttered out had he never met Moore again, but he does.
And wait, why was Moore working at the restaurant?
So it was just like a side job that he took for more income. Sort of when he was off duty, he would work in these restaurants, and these were also restaurants located in two of his sort of beats as a police officer. Often off-duty police officers will bounce at clubs or something like that. So it's a little bit like that, except this was more of a diner, so there wasn't really bouncing that needed to be done. So he basically kept himself busy by helping the madrasas keep the place running.
Although it does seem like this is a situation where a bouncer would have been helpful.
Yeah, certainly. And he does ultimately, in that first encounter, bounce the brother out of there. Here's what happens next. On January 17th, the fateful day that Moore is killed, Moore's sister Kathleen Finney drives him to the marshal's office, where he checks into the marshal's office and he hooks up with another marshal named Rayber, and Rayber drives him out to Eleanor Madras's restaurant to drop him off for his custodial shift. And on the car ride, he happens to tell the story to Rayber of how he encountered the owner's kind of out there brother. I mean, and to him, it's a humorous story. He's like, yeah, man, this crazy punch-drunk boxer guy, braced me in the restaurant and was telling me he was going to attack me, telling me he was going to kill me. I told him I was a marshal. I showed him my gun, and he backed off. And Rayber expresses some concern to his friend, and Moore just kind of brushes it off and says, hey, don't worry, man, I can handle that guy. So basically, Rayber drops Moore off at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By 6, Moore calls his sister, says everything's going swimmingly, and he should be home early that night. Well, at 7 o'clock, in walks Evans. And Evans immediately sees Moore and flies into a rage again, and he runs over to him and he tells him he's going to beat the living shit out of him. Well, at the time, it's just Evans and Moore in the restaurant. But Eleanor Madras was in the habit of coming in to the restaurant just before closing, which was 8 o'clock. So as luck would have it, shortly after her brother comes in and starts threatening Frederick Moore, Madras herself shows up, and she calms her brother down, and he hangs out for a few minutes acting sort of friendly and normal. And then she hands the restaurant keys to Frederick Moore to close up, and she takes her brother home because Evans, her brother, lives with her. After she goes to bed that night, Evans, who apparently still just has this burning coal of anger towards Moore in his mind, he gets out of bed, he gets his .32 caliber revolver, and he goes to look for Frederick Moore.
Very cool and normal behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Just, after your sister goes to bed, you grab a gun and go stalk the streets to murder the stranger that you've threatened twice now for no apparent reason. And this is where the events get a little fuzzy. So Evans kills Moore, or so we think, and he then drinks an entire bottle of whiskey, attempts to hitchhike but can't get picked up, and so he finally catches a bus to Olancha from Pasadena. He arrives in Olancha, and then the next morning he shows up at his ex-wife Alice Adams' house. And when she opens the door, he's shit-faced wasted and his clothes are covered in blood. And he's rambling and babbling about having killed a man.
Again, very cool and normal.
Yeah. It's neither of those things. And so, as I mentioned, they had a son together. That son is now 14. Over the mother's objections, Evans basically grabs his son by the hand, pulls his son into a bedroom of the house, shuts the door, and spends over an hour telling him this wild and rambling, sort of almost hallucinatory story of how he murdered a man. Now, during this time, of course, Adams gets very alarmed, and she calls the police. So the police show up. Evans freely admits to killing Marshal Frederick Moore, and he volunteers, yeah, I killed him. And this is the story he tells. He says, I found Moore, and I asked him, "Why do you have to treat my sister so badly?" Now, there's no evidence whatsoever that Moore treats the sister badly. I mean, Moore works in both restaurants that the husband and the sister own. But Evan's story is, he says, "Why do you have to treat my sister so badly?" And at that point, Moore put his hand on his gun, and so Evans, fearing for his own life, drew his gun and shoots Moore first. In a moment of clarity, he says, "Oh my gosh," he suddenly feels awful. And he says to himself, "God in heaven, I've killed a man. What have I done?" And he actually, according to him, leans over and kisses the face of Marshal Frederick Moore. This is the story he tells to the police upon being captured. But when they find him, his body and his mind are weakened by huge amounts of alcohol and no food and no desire to eat. So the police have a hard time getting him to actually focus on what happened those 12 hours before. So, the next 36 hours, the police drive Moore all over Pasadena, looking for the body, trying to get him to tell them where the body is. And he wants to help, but he has no recollection of what really happened. And the best... Yeah. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, please stop me, please.
I mean, is it no recollection, or is this like that other case we covered with the quote, like not the non-alcohol related blackout defense?
yeah, right. Exactly the no memory psychotic break. I wasn't myself, and I have no recollection of it. Well, the answer is that's not clear, except to say that the only one who insists that he murdered Moore is Evans. So if this is some sly way of trying to get out from under the murder, it's a strange, sly way to do it, because nobody believes Evans necessarily murdered Moore except for Evans himself.
Right, and there's no body, you said.
Correct. They can't find it.
Okay, I got a theory here.
Please.
All of this public fighting, this is all posturing. These guys are buddies. Moore has some problems. He needs to skip town. And so this guy has helped fake his death.
I like that. That's very Sherlock Holmes. That's very Conan Doyle-esque. That's a good one. So they drive him around, and the best he can come up with is that I buried the body in a hole surrounded by trees. Basically, during this process of trying to find Moore's body, Evans has a complete breakdown, and so he is then sent to the Mendocino Hospital for the Criminally Insane, the Arkham Asylum of the Redwoods, if you will. And interesting side note, Adam, if you'll remember when we did the Gilbert Francis Colley story.
I thought this was the same place, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. This is the same mental hospital that Gilbert Francis Colley
and what's the year?
From.
Are they there at the same time?
This is 1947, so no, this is some 13 years later.
Yeah. I was going to say, maybe we could have started our Kinda Murdery Legion of Doom.
Yeah. Anyone who goes to that hospital.
Yeah. And I'm from up in that area. I'm from Humboldt, which is the next county north from Mendocino, and there's a university, a college up there, a city college called College of the Redwoods. So I guess it's just my own little inside joke to call it Arkham Asylum of the Redwoods. So that's what you want to do on a podcast, is tell jokes that only you yourself understand the reference. That's a recipe for success. So by October of that year, it's deemed that Evans is sufficiently mentally recovered to assist in his own defense and to stand trial. But ultimately, when he goes to trial and he is cross-examined by the prosecutor, he continues to maintain his own guilt. But still, he cannot be any more specific than I buried the body in a hole with trees all around. And so, ultimately, the judge says, we have no body. We actually have no evidence. There's no way to prove that Frederick Moore is even dead. We don't know that he's dead. And so the case is dismissed. Evans is innocent of this crime that he insists he committed.
Did he kill someone else and then just assumed it was the guy he had a grudge against?
I thought you were going to say that Moore just kind of returned to work the next night.
Yeah. Moore like read that this guy had confessed to his murder, and he was like, all right, well, I'll go on vacation for a bit. I didn't like him anyway. And then he comes back afterwards.
Yeah, that is a mystery because there's, as far as I could tell, Moore is in fact never seen again, but he's an adult person who has disappeared, and there's no evidence of a crime that they can make stand up in court. And there's
wow. And they can't connect the bloody shirt to him if there's no it's obviously pre DNA and all that. So
exactly,
that's it. That's interesting. So this is actually a situation. I feel like the most likely thing, all these like ideas we're throwing out, really the most likely thing is like, yeah, this guy did kill him, but he did such a good job of leaving no evidence, and the cops did such a bad job of finding anything that they were just like, I guess there's no case here.
Right? It's really interesting because that almost implies what you were saying, Adam, about is this just kind of a genius way to get out of a crime? Like if you kill someone and you can hide the body well enough, maybe your best bet is to preemptively, really strongly insist that you murdered the person.
Because then also, I feel like if they went to court with it, right? So, I mean, the case is dismissed, but does that fall under then, like, double jeopardy? Like, does that mean that he's, like, innocent of that? And if in the event they did find him, they couldn't try him?
I would maybe. I would think so, and and this, of course, is why
that's a really good way to get out of a murder charge.
I know. But I mean, the writ of habeas corpus is much older than our legal system, even, and it basically just says there can be no murder without a body. You must produce a body, otherwise people could accuse people of murder willy-nilly. So this really came out in the favor of Evans in that way, although he, to his credit, I guess, really wants to be incarcerated for the crime, so maybe it didn't work out for him. But
it's interesting to think that you can't just insist that you go to jail, because I've heard some people, like, they try to get back into jail just because they miss the dental care and stuff.
Yeah. And then the other one, and I've heard this from people who work in mental institutions, is that when you're institutionalized, she called it 3 hots and a cot. You've got an indoor bed to sleep in, and you've got 3 hot meals a day, and that's a better deal than a lot of people who are sadly on the streets might be facing otherwise. So the newspaper interviews a Pasadena policeman in 1952, about 5 years after this happens. And what he has to say is that sometimes he sort of thinks back on this case and he asks himself what he has in terms of it being one of the unsolved cases of his career, and he says, all I've got is a hole in the ground with trees all around and a man who can't remember.
Yeah, he's got some bars.
Nice.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and that's the story of the maybe murdered Frederick Moore and the maybe murderer, Mr. Punch-Drunk, Shell-Shocked Evans.
Very nice.
So, interestingly, this story, guys, it has 3 elements that continue to reoccur in our murder stories on this show. 3 things that we might almost call the DNA or the often DNA of a Kinda Murdery podcast murder. I bet you can guess what one of those is.
Might it be a murder?
Yeah. Well, yes, indeed. This is actually the DNA of the murder itself. So the first one, of course, is the Mojave Desert. You know, all of our murders somehow involve the Mojave Desert. The second is a murdery and prodigiously strong Napoleon. In other words, a super short guy with almost superhuman freakish strength. We've run into that
Polly
before.
2.0.
Indeed. And the third is killers with 3 names. Now, it's not just us that know about it, but obviously everybody knows about John Wayne Gacy. We talked about John David Hinckley, who shot at Reagan. We told that story about James Davies Rowan, the Tooth Fairy, who killed the Dog Man. Well, here we go. We've got another killer with 3 names in Stephen Leslie Wilson. And this is a story that appeared in the LA Times on August 12th of 1984.
Also, not just 3 names there, 3 first names.
Yes, right. 3 first names.
A lot of the ones who they use their middle name, it's because the first and last name are too common. Like, it can't just be John Smith. I know this because I used to make the wikis for killers. If we wanted to SEO optimize, we would end up putting the middle name in the title.
Makes sense.
So is it an ego trip for the killer wanting to differentiate themselves, or what you're saying is it's the people who are reporting or recording the events?
The news that you can't just be like the murderer John Smith, so you say John Wayne Smith or whatever.
Got it. You can't just be the murderer Stephen Wilson. You have to be Stephen Leslie Wilson. Got it.
There we
All
go.
right.
Mystery solved.
Stop bullying.
That being said, I kind of enjoyed the mystery.
Well, yeah. Thanks for ruining the mat. No, that was actually really...
I liked walking through life thinking anyone I met with 3 names might be a murderer, but...
Oh my gosh, yeah. So that's really funny. That was actually really good knowledge there, Mahbod.
That's really it's really cool, actually.
I've got a weird name, so if I ever get convicted, God forbid, if I ever get convicted for murder, I'm going to insist that they give me a 3rd name too.
I like how you said, God forbid you get convicted, not God forbid you kill someone.
Yeah, right. That's an important distinction.
He knows how to get out of it now from the first story.
So what would be your serial killer middle name if you got to pick it, Mahbod?
Zevon. No, I'm kidding. See, I don't know. Maybe like Mahbod Tupac Moghadam or something.
Tupac's your favorite rapper, right?
He's my favorite everything.
Yeah.
It goes Tupac, then Beethoven, then Shakespeare. Those are my top 3.
Let's get back to the story of Stephen Leslie Wilson. So a little background on Olancha. And, I want to be sure that I tell this story a little bit carefully because this all happened, starting in the 82, 83, 84. And I would presume that this family is still out there. So bear with me or rein me in if anybody feels like I'm not being properly respectful to them. I often on this show, we try to do historical stories from a really long time ago so that there's really no risk of the person who this happened to listening. But anyway, with that little disclaimer, Olancha is home to a prominent ranching family named the Thornburgs. And specifically, there are the 2 children of the Thornburg family are sisters Tracy and Callie Thornburg, Callie being the elder. And this story, the story of Stephen Leslie Wilson, is the story of the ex-husband of the elder sister, Callie Thornburg. So in the mid-70s, Stephen Leslie Wilson moves to Olancha, and he gets a job at the Olancha talc mill. So when he moves there in the mid-70s, he's about 30 years old. He's divorced, and he's the father of a school-age son. And those are the sort of mundane details about this man. Here are the more interesting ones. He is fluent in Spanish. He's handsome and extremely charming when he wants to be. And he's also a prodigiously strong weightlifter and martial arts expert. And while they say that he can be extremely charming when he wants to be, it's in that sort of classic sociopath sense that he also is known to have just like a towering temper and fits of insane rage that people will describe as being the result of his over-pridefulness.
Another cool and normal guy.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I need a different middle name.
Yeah. Oh, is your middle name Leslie?
No, but I can feel what you're describing coming, so it's only a matter of time.
Brendan Leslie Hubbard.
Towering insane rages, yeah. So Stephen Leslie Wilson likes to boast about his strength, and he'll show it off by lifting his co-workers at the talc mill with one arm.
I bet they love that.
Yeah. And like I said, this sort of intense narcissism coupled with insane rage and also the ability to be very charming just makes him sound like almost the stereotype of a Hollywood sociopath. I mean, that's how I think you would describe Patrick Bateman or what is said about Ted Bundy or anyone else like that. So, but however crazy his temper might be, he's a nice enough guy to convince Callie Thornburg to marry him in 1978. But things go awry within months. They go awry very quickly. And one of the pieces of evidence of that is also a great example both of how strong Wilson is and of how crazy his temper is. One of his talc mill co-workers tells a story about one time he saw Wilson fighting with his wife, with Callie Thornburg, and Callie Thornburg had a brand new pickup truck parked next to where they were arguing. And he saw Wilson, in this fit of crazy rage, dismantle Callie's pickup truck with his bare fucking hands. He said he ripped the seats out of the truck and threw them on the ground, and ripped the steering wheel off the truck and threw that on the ground, all with nothing but his bare hands.
Wow.
So he was so strong and so crazy angry that he became like a one-man human chop shop, just tearing apart this truck.
That's kind of hot.
I mean, I guess it depends what you're into. So literally within like months, Wilson and Thornburg's marriage falls apart, and she moves back in with her father. Now, William Thornburg is the patriarch of the Thornburg family, and they have stature, and he's very well known and very well liked, and he's a classic cowboy hat wearing rancher. And he's kind of famous for wearing this giant silver belt buckle that says 100 miles in one day. But apparently what the 100 miles in one day is that there was a endurance horse race that he would participate in and win, where you ride on horseback for 100 miles in one day. So that's where this belt buckle came from, and he was known for wearing it everywhere that he went. So in spring of 79, when Callie's marriage has fallen apart, as I said, she moves back in with her dad. And Stephen Leslie Wilson is insanely jealous of this. In fact, even before the marriage fell apart, he was insanely jealous of Callie's close relationship with her father. When she would go see her dad, he would stalk them, and he would sort of set up his own little sting not that far away, and he would watch his wife visiting with her dad. So, I mean, just really crazy, toxic behavior there.
Yeah, not great.
And this, of course, gets worse when she moves back in with her father. So, basically, he starts, actively stalking the father, and then he goes and he lays in wait for him in a hayfield. And the father comes out to the hayfield to work the hayfield, and Stephen Leslie Wilson abducts the father at gunpoint, drives him out into the desert, forces him to dig his own grave, then shoots him in the back of the head twice.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not until 6 months later that the disappearance of Mr. Thornburg is explained, when authorities find in this drainage ditch a corpse wearing that famous 100 miles in one day silver belt buckle. So that's in October of 79. So Wilson is then at large.
So Wilson he's big and he's dumb and he's angry.
Well, yeah, he's small but extremely muscle bound. So he's got a huge amount of kinetic energy packed into his.
So he's not the Incredible Hulk. He's the insufferable bulk. How about that?
Yeah, I love it. That's great. I wish I'd named this story the Insufferable Bulk. This story is now called the Insufferable Bulk. Everyone, thank you, Adam.
Those types of guys, they have a certain personality. It's like SpongeBob when he becomes suddenly ripped,
Yeah. The excess of testosterone. I mean, this behavior, to me, it sounds like he was probably a roid head. I mean, if he's flipping out all the time and ripping cars apart with his bare hands, he's probably, and proud of his body, he's probably on steroids. But he is at large following the murder of Mr. Thornburg, who's discovered in October of 79. He's at large until November of 1981, where he is arrested at the airport in Vegas by the FBI. So between 79 and 81, because he's on the lam, he's gone from being a small-town murderer to being a on-the-top most wanted list hunted by the FBI murderer. So he then goes to Folsom Prison, the prison made famous by the Johnny Cash song, of course. He goes to Folsom Prison, where he is a model prisoner, where I guess he cranks up the charm. He's beloved by the guards, by the prison workers. He gets a job making $17 a month, working the filing for the prison counseling office, because it said he had the rare skill in prison of knowing how to type and work a filing cabinet. And he is then so well liked and good at that job that he is promoted to working in the warehouses, which that pays $75 a month and is considered like he's got like a C-suite job in prison, basically. And now this is where, remember at the beginning of the story, guys, I said it was like The Great Escape meets Patrick Bateman?
Yeah.
Well, he starts working in the warehouse. He's driving forklifts. He has access to tools, and he also has access to all the comings and goings and schedules for all of the delivery trucks. So he has ingratiated himself with the prison staff so much that they basically give him a job where they pay him to have access to all the information he would need to plan an escape.
Very good planning on their part.
And, Stephen Leslie Wilson is not a man to let an opportunity pass. On August 2nd, 1984, at 9:10 a.m., a red and white delivery truck pulls into Folsom. About 40 minutes earlier, the foreman had reported his tin shears used for cutting metal, had gone missing. But apparently on a busy day when there was a lot of work going on in the warehouses or on the loading dock, this was not an uncommon occurrence for things to go missing, so not much was thought of it. It's also of note that guards generally did not supervise the work going on the loading dock. So on this particular day, the work was being supervised by two, what the paper calls free men, meaning not prisoners but civilians. Suddenly, sort of out of nowhere, almost like one of those moments in a sci-fi movie where like the machines rise up and attack humans, all of a sudden 3 forklifts come sort of out of nowhere, about to converge on each other and crash into each other. And those forklift drivers narrowly avoid the crash. And it is thought later that Wilson somehow orchestrated this near crash of forklifts, although no one ever really knows how he would have done that. So there's some confusion as the forklifts are about to crash, and then they stop the crash, they clear it all out, and then at 9:40 that same day, the delivery truck is padlocked by a prison guard, and it rolls out of the prison yard.
It's a tense situation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right. I know. Police are sent to the truck yard, where the truck is found still closed and still padlocked where the guards had padlocked it on the outside. But the police cut the lock, pull up the back of the truck with guns drawn, and inside they find the sweaty blue denim shirt of Dennis Leslie Wilson, and they find that a 1 foot by 2 foot square opening has been cut in the roof of the truck with the tin shears, and Wilson is nowhere to be found. He's gone. He escaped.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's worth noting that about 15 years earlier, 2 prisoners had escaped Folsom in exactly the same way. They'd hidden under a prison bed in a delivery truck and managed to cut their way out the top of it. This exact escape had occurred 15 years earlier. However, those two prisoners were captured within a couple months. Wilson was not. He is not caught. He is not caught for so long that he becomes an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. You guys remember that show?
Yeah. I'm reading it now, yeah. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, so there he goes. He escapes in 1984. And of course, this article started and was written in 1984 on August 12th, which was a few days after he had escaped. So the whole story I told you appeared in the paper a few days after Wilson had escaped. And it was shrouded in the understandable fear and terror of the Thornburg family in Olancha, because now this man who had murdered their father is on the lam, and nobody knows where he is, but they know he's out. Callie, his ex-wife, at this point, she has remarried and moved away. But her sister Tracy still lives in Olancha, as does the rest of the family. And the reporter asked Tracy why she thinks that Wilson murdered her father, and what she says, I think, is very telling about, the kind of sociopath he is. And she says, I think he killed my father because we were a very close family, and he just couldn't understand that. So remember, he's still out there. He eventually is captured 8 years later in 1992 in London, England.
Wow.
Shout out to Adam.
So that means he went from being a local Mojave ghost town of about less than 200 residents killer to being an FBI most wanted to being an international Interpol manhunt killer.
Wow.
He's captured in April of 1992. In October of that same year, he's extradited to the United States, and he is sent back to Folsom.
Wait, when was the Unsolved Mysteries episode?
91.
90. So was it because of that episode that he was caught?
Yeah, it said he disappeared just before the airing of that episode.
Interesting. Did he know the episode was coming out? Like someone tipped him off?
It's a good question.
Oh, you mean he was around and nobody was looking for him for that?
He was living in Florida, apparently, under the name Moyer, and then I guess something tipped him off, and then he went to England, and then his girlfriend is who the FBI followed.
Wow.
So in other words,
yeah.
They figured out retroactively that he had disappeared, because once they caught him, they realized the pseudonym he had been living under, etc. Got it. So he goes back to Folsom, and this is still not the end of the story of Stephen Leslie Wilson. First of all, if it were me and I was running the justice system, I would not send him back to the same prison he'd already escaped from. But they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely send him somewhere a little more secure.
Yeah.
So he's back in Folsom in 1992, and then in 1994 he applies for the right to be married, and it is granted. However, what is denied is the right to have conjugal visits with his new wife. And the reason it's denied is because under the law, if you are convicted of committing a violent crime toward a family member, you cannot have conjugal visits, which I think makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But not long after that marriage, several months later, he is sent a small package by his wife, and inside that package are what is described as paraphernalia of escape. Like, she sent him a chocolate cake with a file.
Yeah.
Tin snips.
Yeah, they said she sent him a chocolate cake with a file in the middle. And because of that, because this would constitute his second attempt to escape from Folsom, and of course, as we've just discussed, the first one was wildly successful, he is then sent to Pelican Bay, which is California's only supermax prison, and it's in Crescent City, about 80 miles from where I grew up in Arcata, California. And that's where they send the absolute worst of the worst. Like the organized crime head who can still run his organization from inside the prison, he's in Pelican Bay. Again, this same person I referenced, who I know who spent a lot of his life as a convict, said that getting sent to Pelican Bay by lifelong prisoners was viewed as getting a big promotion in a corporation. Like if you got sent from Pelican Bay to Pelican Bay, you just went
why
from
is
being
that?
Because only the hardest ass guys are sent there. So if you were part of a gang or a mafia organization or any kind of criminal organization, if you ended up sent from Folsom to Pelican Bay, it was like you went from being the VP of marketing to the CEO of the whole damn place in terms of the organization that you ran. So as far as I know, and I couldn't find specific information on this, but Stephen Leslie Wilson is still incarcerated at Pelican Bay Penitentiary in Crescent City, California.
Wow.
Cool.
All right, so, I think I called it something else in the itinerary, but in my notes here, I have this story just labeled as Crazy Pilot Story, and honestly, there's really no better title for it than that. I want to say that Kinda Murdery is entirely an entertainment podcast. Everything we say should be taken in that vein and not taken as serious fact, because I'm going to tell a story about a man who's a real man, and he wrote a book about his experiences that was published by Simon & Schuster in 2005. But even at the time, and this is reported in the newspapers, his accounts of how things went down were questioned quite severely, to the point that his lawyer asserted that it was having an effect on his mental health. So if I seem to suggest that I find his account of the tale to be unlikely, I'm certainly not the only one. It's well documented that a lot of people felt that way. All right.
Tell us the Deleo.
What the Deleo?
Yeah, exactly. So apparently this is what happened. On November 27th, 1994, Peter Deleo is piloting a small plane over the Owens River Valley with his friends Waverly Hatch and Lloyd Matsumoto. The plane crashes. Initially, all 3 passengers survive. It's late November in the Owens River Valley. It's high altitude. Temperatures are freezing. Everyone decides that Peter, who is the least injured, should go for help. So, on December 10th, 1994, that is, I think, 13 days later, pilot Peter Deleo walks into Olancha and he goes into a cafe and orders food and he starts to eat it. And in that cafe is Lone Pine Airport employee John Pennington, who notes in the article that comes out in the paper later that Deleo appears to be in good shape. The waitress, however, thinks he looks beat up, so she calls the police. Deleo declines the ambulance and then goes and tells the police about his plane crash and his 2 other friends and that he's come here to help save them. But he also says that he assumed that they've already been rescued because he saw on his hike back, he saw rescue planes flying low over the area where they had crashed. He refuses an ambulance. He says he's okay, and he doesn't initially tell anybody that, hey, you got to go rescue my friends, because as he tells the police, I assume that they were already rescued, which I found to be strange, to say the least. And I'll get to why it's so strange in a moment. So he leads the authorities to the crash site some 20 miles away, where it's found that Hatch has frozen to death. That's Waverly Hatch. She's frozen to death. And on a second autopsy, they determined that her back was most likely broken in the crash. And as for Matsumoto, he has died from a crushed chest. By July of 1995, so that this is 6 months later, Deleo has appeared on Dateline. And the story that he tells on Dateline And the story that he tells in his book, which is called Survive, published by Simon & Schuster, is pretty different than what the articles at the time when it happened suggest. Here's what the story is 6 months later when he's on Dateline, okay? He says that he crashed and that he was pinned in the plane with his arms stuck behind himself, so he couldn't use his arms, so that he bashed out the plane window with his head. Now, maybe the plane window was severely cracked in the crash, but I mean, plane windows are really thick, really strong glass. So I'm picturing a guy, if his arms are pinned behind his back, he's basically bashing out a window with his face, which if anyone's ever gotten a cut on their head knows how profusely that bleeds. He then says, I had one useless arm, I had 5 broken ribs, and I had a severely broken ankle. So now the story is that with a presumably battered head and face that he's used to bash out a plane window, with one useless arm, with 5 broken ribs, and with a severely broken ankle, in the middle of winter, he walked 20 miles into Olancha, but then, as told by witnesses at the time, his first act was to go into a restaurant, order some food, and refuse an ambulance. I mean, does anybody else think that this story just begs belief, or am I just an asshole skeptic here?
I mean, no, it all sounds like complete bullshit. I don't believe a word of it.
Look, complete and utter bullshit. First of all, if you walk, by the way, this is through mountains in the dead of winter. If you walk 20 miles on a broken ankle, I can only, let's say that you truly are trained like Wesley, the Men in Black from The Princess Bride, and you can totally ignore the pain. I would still think there would be sort of a level of swelling and edema and possibly infection and etc. that would make it A, excruciating, and B, in need of immediate medical attention. Because remember, he walked 20 miles over 2 weeks. So this broken ankle and that wound have been festering and presumably getting worse with every step over the course of 2 weeks. Additionally, he says, besides mentioning that, I found a couple cabins along the way to sleep in, but he says, I lived on bugs, and here's where my BS meter really went off. I lived on lizards. Okay.
So this very, fucked up guy with a smashed up face and only one arm and no ribs is running around in the desert catching and eating lizards?
Right.
That's his story?
Yeah, yes. Now, here's what I have to say about that. I am a pet owner. I own 2 lizards. I own a veiled chameleon, and I own a bearded dragon. And as everybody knows, they're reptiles. They don't create their own heat, so they need heat to survive and to be able to move quickly. So I guess the one part of this that's a little bit believable would be the idea that these lizards would not be fast this time of year. However, a lizard in the winter in the wild like that, basically they go into hibernation like bears. They go into a tree hollow or under a rock, and they wait for themselves to freeze, and they basically go into almost like a suspended animation state until it gets warm enough for them to emerge and survive.
They just self-carbonate?
But yeah, I actually do. It's pretty amazing.
Wow.
But
that's amazing. I want to eat it. That makes me want to eat one, but it also makes me not want to eat one.
Well, so Deleo claims to have had no survival training prior to this. Maybe he happened to know somehow that lizards hibernate under rocks and in trees. But to note that, you would not have been seeing a lizard out in the open running about. You would have had to know to look into rocks or trees with your one working arm. And then when you found that lizard, you would have had to be able to eat it raw and alive, and while holding it with the one hand, tearing it to chewable size pieces with your teeth and your presumably pretty damaged face and mouth that may have bits of glass in it because you smashed the airplane window out with your head, right? And then, has anybody here besides myself ever had a bruised rib, much less a broken one?
Thankfully, no.
Okay, well,
Yes.
a bruised rib is incredibly painful. Like,
Well, no,
it's
Bear had one.
Right. So, Bear, incredibly painful. Let alone 5 broken ribs. 5.
Yeah.
So, and yet, he gets into town on a broken ankle with all these broken ribs and only one working arm by hunting and finding lizards in tree hollows and under rocks that he eats while frozen and still alive with his broken face. So I'm not going to say this about Peter Deleo because I don't want to slander anybody, but if these exact string of events had happened to any other person other than Terminator robot and superhero Peter Deleo, you would think that they were exaggerating their story to make their Dateline appearance and eventual book sale much better, right? That's one thing you might think. Or you might think that the way the whole story is said to have gone down may very well not be how it went down.
Yeah.
Yeah. More power to him if he has the physical prowess and the ability to overcome pain to such a level that it all happened exactly how he said. But when it got to I survived primarily eating lizards in the dead of winter, by the way, the average temperature where he was in California that time of the year would be around 30 degrees in the evenings and at night. You're just not finding a bunch of lizards' popsicles to eat.
High-protein popsicles.
Oh, my gosh.
If he's being honest, it kind of reminds me of The Stranger, Camus, where the guy's telling the truth, but just no one believes that he can be so cold-hearted. Like, you can just be a sociopath. You're not necessarily a bad person, but that's the kind of person you are.
Yeah. I just think that if you're not a sociopath and you overcome this incredible Herculean trial, the first thing you would say at the instant you arrived in town, you'd flag down the very first person and be like, please, we have to go rescue my friends. The whole, I assumed they were already rescued because I saw planes flying in the area. You're comfortable assuming that your friends are probably fine after you've virtually killed yourself ostensibly to save them?
Yeah, that's nonsense. I'm sorry, that's nonsense.
Right, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Out of deference to your own accomplishment and the horror that you've just put yourself through to rescue your friends, according to you. It cannot suddenly become unimportant to you to rescue your friends. I walked 20 miles on a broken ankle with broken ribs and an arm that didn't work, and I lived on lizards just to save my friends. But when I finally got there, I was like, I just would rather have a meal. They must be fine.
Yeah.
Well, because maybe he's putting myself in the sociopath's shoes. It's easy for me to do because I'm not so far away myself. Maybe he's just thinking, I didn't know it would take so long. If it took so long, then they're probably fine. I got in shape eating the lizards and doing this desert workout.
I mean, at the 2-week mark, you start getting into a Dahmer party, you're going to start eating each other, so that makes sense.
Yeah. Look, I know newspapers don't always get it right, but this is hardly the yellow journalism era of the late 1800s and early 1900s, which we sometimes draw from for this show. And it's a known historical fact that these papers that were owned by William Randolph Hearst and others often exaggerated the events that happened as a way to sell more papers, right? Well, the Associated Press out of Olancha in 1994, I don't think is a yellow journalist institution. I'm inclined to think that those reports spoken by people at the time are true. And based on the ordeal that he described, I feel like he would walk into town looking like Leo DiCaprio from The Revenant. Like there should be no way that anyone could think that, the guy looked like he was in pretty good shape. He was enjoying
he should be like dragging himself by his one arm, begging for help.
Right. Like, how was he even enjoying his steak and eggs at the cafe if only one arm worked? Is he eating it with his broken glass-filled face?
Yeah, he's just slamming his head into the table because apparently he's got a forehead made of bricks.
Yeah, right. Well, you know what, Mahbod, it has been so fun to hang with you. Thank you so much for being here with us.
I hope our discussion of death can serve to promote more life.
Amen, brother. Absolutely. Well, for Adam Volrich, Sean Christensen, Brendan Hubbard, and, of course, the boss of Bitcoin, Mahbod Moghadam, I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.